last thing I want to talk about is last night's Survivor episode. And it was very interesting. A lot of you may not like Survivor, but I think that this kind of speaks to a broader issue socially. And it was very, very, very strange. It was very strange. They were at tribal council. For those of you who don't know how Survivor works, you go to tribal council and everyone kind of talks about the game and like how they're playing, and then they all vote and they vote someone out, and that person loses Survivor basically, and then we move on to next week. So they're at the portion where they're talking things out, talking about the game, and one of the guys on there, Jamal, makes the comment that he is worried about an all-girls alliance. He's worried about that because that's something that happens on Survivor, is that if you get one gender or the other gender that outnumbers the other gender, that oftentimes that they will bond, because, you know, who knew? Females get along more than females and males when it comes to friendship. And males get along when it comes to friendship. Who knew? And he said that, right? And when he said it, any rational or normal person would just be like, okay, yeah, I'd be worried about that too, Jamal. Well, Kelly, one of the other, she goes, oh my God, that is so sexist. That is, how dare you? Sexism, I say. What? And her claim was that because he is worried about an all-girl alliance, that he's implying that women get to, like, that women only flock to other women, or he was generalizing, or something like that. And then another woman said, that's a very negative thing to say. The older lady, what's her name? I forget her name. But she said, that's a very negative thing to say that you're worried about an all-girl alliance or speculating on an all-girl alliance. And the thing is that the girl that was sitting in front of him admitted, yes, I tried to form an all-girl alliance. She admitted it right there. So his worries were justified, but the mere fact that he mentioned an all-girls alliance, that was sexist. And not to mention the fact that the previous week, Jamal was in a similar instance where he was the one being offended when someone called his buff a do-rag, and that was racist, and how dare the other person, and fuck this how dare culture, man. I hate it. But anyways, my frustration with this is probably a bit overblown. It's just, it's kind of silly. It really is. But it's just interesting to me how there is this imbalance between, this conversational imbalance between people nowadays, where you have the person who's speaking and the person who's listening. And the person who's speaking has to be very, very careful about what he says, because whatever he says, he is risking offending the other person. As Jordan Peterson says, in order for him to be honest, he has to risk offending the person that he's speaking to. He has to risk that. Now, not saying that he's going to do it, but if you do end up offending someone, oftentimes the results can be disastrous for your life. I mean, we're talking jail time, or not jail time, I'm sorry. We're talking losing your job. We're talking, being a social pariah, having your name dragged through the mud. It has serious life-altering consequences, right? And that's a cost. And where the imbalance is that just to be fair, as a person that is speaking and doing, you do have somewhat of a responsibility to take another person's feelings into consideration, right? This is just something we do as a society. It's polite. That's basically what we call it. Being polite is worrying about, to some degree, how the other person is going to perceive what you're saying. But you can only do that to a certain extent. And, if you make an error in judgment, the results can be disastrous. Where the imbalance lies is with the person that is being offended or potentially being offended, you also have a responsibility to decide what is worth being offended over. is this worth being offended over? Because if you are offended and you dare to use the word sexist or racist, which are extremely volatile terms that can ruin someone's life, it can. They have tangible consequences. If you do that, I mean, that's a massive, massive responsibility. The imbalance is the fact that if you make an error in judgment and you become offended too quickly, you could ruin someone's life, and there's a chance that you might be celebrated for your error in judgment. I got downvoted into oblivion on Reddit for putting this argument forward earlier. It's so strange to me that people are willing to have that conversational imbalance for the sake of someone else's feelings. Yes, we ought to take them into account, but there is a limit. We can't allow someone else's offense to police our speech to the point to where we're not even thinking freely anymore. Because if you think freely, then you risk speaking freely. And if you speak freely, you risk being called a racist or a sexist and becoming a social pariah, losing your employment, or other bad things happening to you. And that's not a world I want to live in.